Spice and Wolf, episode 13. Let's talk about it. I actually prepared for this a little bit. I read a little bit in the volumes. Here's what you can expect. We're gonna go through the episode a little bit, talk about some interesting scenes, nice scenes that I actually liked, and the presentation. We're gonna talk a little bit about differences between the original, like the 2008 anime, 2009 anime. That was season 2, episode 0, the OVA. And as a comparison point, obviously, here the remake. And what was different, what was the same. It's very interesting how we can express the same things in very different ways, but at the same time reach at the same overall atmospheric conclusion, right? Keep the same themes going in a way. And after that, we're gonna read 2 or 3 excerpts. I do have 2 excerpts here. One of them is the Afterword by I have to look, obviously, because I'm afraid to make a mistake. Isuna Hasekura. I would probably have said it right. I thought it right in my head. I wanted to look anyway. The Afterword, which I find always a little bit nice and amusing to just read what's going through the mind of an author and whatnot. The second one I wanted to actually highlight. Oh no, we only have one. The second one I wanted to highlight and I wanted to read is actually in this volume right here, which is volume 7 of Spice and Wolf. Side colors. Side colors is often just side stories, basically, right? Things that are not the main plot, but that have to do with Holo or Lawrence, or Holo and Lawrence. And is talking about stories that happened in the past or are happening right now. We do have both in these. The first one I would probably go into is The Boy and the Girl and the White Flowers, because there was actually a YouTube comment left to me by Superion Maximus 9900. So shout out to you for leaving that comment. Who actually pointed out, rightfully so, that there was an amazing reference to this story of the volume 7, which is way later, but of this volume 7 was in this episode. We do have 2 or 3 flashes where there is the actual reference, and interestingly enough, in the old Spice and Wolf as well. So both of them reference this particular story, which makes sense because they both flash back to that particular story, even in the novel, because we do actually have something like this in the novel, right? We do have that preparation of going to Reuvenhagen and having done the smuggling and sitting down with Nora, doing a feast and whatnot. We do have that in this Side Colors volume. You have to keep in mind this came out way later than volume 2 of Spice and Wolf, which means that this is like just an after the fact, hey, this is what happened in between here, right? And we're using that as a setup, as a stage in order to kind of just show people what happened right there, right? Specify a little bit, get a little bit something of detail in between that is more slice of lifey, maybe just an interesting episode. But let's get into it, right? Let's get it on the screen right now. As we can see, we do have a similar setup, right? We do have a similar makeup. We're zooming into the different symbol, right? But it is the same, right? We have a shot to the symbol of the inn, and then we're showing what's going on inside of the inn. The atmosphere is very similar. We do have the chandeliers and the 3 people sitting, although in the original they're already like they're being seated, and in this one they're already sitting there. We do have slight differences that I wanted to point out, and we're gonna shortly switch to the old version to just see a little bit of how this looks. It's more, since it's an OVA, it's more like with credits, and we're slowly blending those in. Here's the symbol of the inn, as we can see, right? And the angle is similar, right? We're just reverse shotting it and have a different symbol. And it's not that important. We're getting seated here, and we're starting our feast. It's very similar. One shot I find very nice, which is this one where we're zooming past Holo while we're looking at the conversation between Lawrence and Nora, which is basically there is a conversation between two people going on, and the third person is just observing as it's going on, and the camera is just kind of point of viewing here and moving around, like around the back of her to actually symbolize that. Just the separation between the flow of conversation and the person actually having the perspective. What we focus a lot on is Holo's jealousy actually in the old anime, while the focus in the new one is more on just general talk. And yes, her jealousy is in here. It happens, but she is more downtrodden, more exhausted, right? The focus is more on her exhaustion. We also see that the remake is using way more like interesting angles, while the old anime is still kind of just using a lot of still frames and panorama pictures that they just zoom past, or they change, right? They change the subject a couple of times where they go from Nora to Lawrence to Nora and whatnot. I do have this scene, which is one-to-one also in the old one, and he's kind of just looking at her, smiling, amused, and Holo is kind of peeved. When we reverse shot look at them here, we do see Nora as well with that piece of right here with that piece, and she's like not getting it done, and Holo's looking over to Lawrence, and Lawrence even blushes in that version of it. But the key difference here is we're focusing on the sheep story, with like sheep loving salt and torture method and licking feet. And while we do tell that in the old anime has a lot of focus on Holo being like, oh no, don't involve me in your conversation. I need to get drunk first, or just you don't have to cater to me and give me anything to eat. I'm gonna get that myself. And what she expects is Lawrence to be like, oh no, you know what? I'm gonna do it for you, right? Him to be overly friendly, but then he's like, all right, you're good? Okay, good. Nora, about that, what we were talking about. And then she's just going nuts about it. Yeah, that is a key difference. That is a key difference because we focus way more on this flow of conversation where Lawrence is really absolutely not realizing what he's doing, in just ignoring Holo, even though Holo asked to be ignored. And not being overly focused on her, that it peeves her. Love that point of view shot, by the way, where we once again symbolize that, hey, yeah, Holo might not be feeling as well as she could. Either way, very much the same until we take ourselves into the land of dreams, where very interesting shots are being used, but at the same time we have similar symbolism. Holo standing in a wide field that feels very lonely, right? Very solemn, very old. She's looking at the customs of the people, right? Especially like the rural villages, and times pass over. And then she's reminiscing about her time with Lawrence and how everything moved faster, how everything every day is something new. And that is something that is very prominent in psychology as well, right? That we realize that our perspective determines a lot about what's happening actually in our lives in general, that we do realize a lot of the things that are going on, if we constantly experience new things, time seems to fly, time seems to go past so much, and we don't think about those worries in the back of our mind. Whereas while we do spend our time alone without any people to comfort us, without any people to do things with, and without any new experience, we blink and suddenly 2 years are gone, or an entire decade in the case of Holo. That's one of the things of the dialogue lines that she was actually saying in the old version of the anime. Here she empathized more that she's having so much fun with Lawrence, and both empathize that, but in the old anime we kind of have a little bit more exposition in her just being like her perception of time changes completely. But it's the same tonal structure, and we do seem to get the same feeling from it in general. Both the old anime and the remake actually manage to convey to the viewer that, yeah, Holo realizes that everything is exciting and new for her. It's like she has been reborn almost, because for all this time, it almost feels like sometimes for decades on end she would be sleeping, right? Because she is this benevolent god that doesn't want to fail the people that she promised to help, right? But at the same time, she does have this underlying feeling of, yeah, there's a lot, like, time's passing very fast. She doesn't have a lot of interactions with other people. And here with Lawrence, this completely changed. Her entire world is turned over, and she feels herself, both anime actually underline that, she feels that she's almost getting too attached, right? She's almost having too much fun, is what she's saying. I do love these paintings. Look at this. This is beautiful, right? And we do have these little snippets, like two little creatures. Who are those, right? Two little humans with Holo. And we do see that in the old anime as well. We do have that. These little snippets where she's like, I've been traveling with other humans before. We're gonna jump over like the 4 humors and Lawrence just wanting to be close to her. I think it's very nice and adorable, this little allusion to just her being like, yeah, if we among wolves, if we rub our noses together, this is something very intimate. It's like if people, like, I assume it's kissed, right? So I do remember something vaguely from like there being like some reference in some cultures about like rubbing your noses together being an Eskimo kiss or something like that, but also like dogs, I think, do that partially. So Lawrence, obviously being the dunce that he is, doesn't realize that, but it's fine. It's fine, right? And this scene is very, very nice because she says like, hey, it's your fault that this is happening. I'm kind of embarrassed and whatnot. And he doesn't get it. And then he does it again. Maybe he's halfway gets it and halfway doesn't. And she just enjoys that in that moment. And is, I mean, we all need a little warmth every once in a while, right? You know how that works on a biological level too, right? The oxytocin and all of these hormones being expressed when we are close to people, we hug people, we have bodily contact. That is something that it kind of has been a huge problem, partially in COVID, for example, or in other times as well, as times move on and where a lot of our relationships are more on a online or far away basis, right? When you can dial up somebody who's at the other end of the world in a hot minute, and there's something missing as well, something that we humans have had for centuries, which is close contact, right? This feeling that you have when you're holding somebody. And if you haven't done that in a while and you have loved ones close by or whatever, and you have people that you care about, I don't know, cuddle every once in a while, just or hug them for 15 seconds. It might feel awkward in the beginning because you're not used to it anymore, right? It's not something you do that often, but it feels great. So do yourself a favor. Either way, little tangent in between, but we do have, again, both anime empathize that almost 1-for-1 the same shot the old anime had. So in a way, they're looking very closely at what does the light novel do and how can we properly adapt that, and also the very successful 2009 anime, how did they do it and how could we do that? There's a lot of inspiration coming from that as well. The ass shot, holy fuck. I mean, it isn't like in your face, right? But it's clearly, it's prominent. And then she has that feint, that soccer player feint. And then we dream again about her past and wolves and whatnot. I think like there's just one scene that I think is superior in the old anime, which I'm going to show in a second. I do really love how we're showing all of these warm colors, how we're showing her in the landscape. Like it almost seems like Toscana-esque, right? Like Italian countryside. And we're showing like the more recent past as well, of course. And we were having a contrast with Lawrence and all of that. But yeah, beautiful reference. As I pointed out, I don't know which. This might also be part of the reference, by the way, because we do have one scene where Holo is actually, we don't know that, like, we don't have Holo point of view in this case, but Holo is watching somebody. I do really love that scene where she's saying, like, among all the humans that she traveled with before, there wasn't one that looked at her that way, and that is just re-empathizing how much the two of them mesh with one another and how they care about each other in general. Yeah, this is the second scene, which I was actually looking for. The two of them, right? We do see like a little boy and a little girl, one with supposedly maybe blonde hair. You could almost see, and the boy with the black hair. You don't see it there, but I know. And the old anime actually had the same thing, right? They had the same reference when it comes to like the boy and the girl, which is the beach reference of them walking right here. They look a little bit older there, but it's fine. We do have the same story beats. We do have the same emotions behind that, right? Melancholy towards the past, but also realizing that there's so much going on and you're having so much fun recently that you all but forgot about that longing that you have for your home, right? That you were feeling lonely and all of that. And maybe all of that is just a symptom of you feeling lonely, right? And you don't even necessarily need to go home. Maybe you need to go home now because you do know it might be difficult to get there and you want to know what happened and all of that to get closure. But other than that, this is one thing I loved about the old anime, which was that they actually had a lot more emphasis on that nose thing, right? And then they embrace, and we're slowly zooming just into her lying in the bed, which is beautifully done with as little flourish as possible. And the second scene, which I really, really loved, was Holo being in that field in the north and just seeing that her family, quote unquote, the other wolves that she used to know, maybe are on one side and Lawrence on the other, and she's running towards Lawrence. And then, but as she arrives, all that is left is a skeleton. I didn't like the thing that came afterwards, where there's like a lot of like red coming into the scene. It's a stylistic choice. I mean, I can show it right here, because then, but it symbolizes, right, there being a barrier between her and her ancestors and all of the family that she used to have, because they're gone as well, right? In like running towards Lawrence, she lost them, but also when she arrived at Lawrence, she also had lost him already, which is and she wakes up with tears in her eyes, which is probably foreshadowing for what's to come later in terms of what her thoughts are gonna be, right? In terms of like, am I gonna lose this person one day? And I mean, that's something to talk about anyway, right? You have to look into how long can we keep traveling together, and when our travels are over, what's gonna happen then? Will we see each other again sometime? And then even if we see each other regularly, I have a completely different lifespan than this person. Something that we also had to deal with in 𝔸𝕬𝕦, although in 𝔸𝕬𝕦 it was mostly after the fact. Yeah, beautifully done here in this one, and in my opinion, a miss in the remake. I think the biggest strength the remake has are the oil painting style sequences, where we do really see that artistic style changes and ways to present things and angles to put something in are very, very effective at making the presentation more palatable for the audience in general. But also there's a couple of key points that the old anime definitely did better in terms of like just key moments that were amazing, even without any tricks and whistles and magic mirrors and whatever. Just the simple symbolism in the scenes themselves and actually mentioning them. But we have time in this remake, right? We do have the time to mention them at any other point in time when we do have to fill some some narrative gap or whatever, we can build that in and have whole dream about these things and think about these things again. Doesn't have to be right now. Does not have to be right now. And we do obviously mirror as well, right? The old anime had the same thing with Nora coming to see her and her just making the best out of the situation. Just she doesn't hate Nora, but she got some animosity about like even the window scene is the same, only that the old anime actually had them completely in a green field as a result of that. One thing I feel that the new anime does different is that the old anime focuses a lot into Holo's jealousy, and it's like a lot more blunt and a lot more she in my opinion even behaves a lot more childish in the old anime, and here in the remake it feels more natural, while jealousy itself is obviously in a way silly, and Holo realizes that as well. I do think it's a little bit more realistic that she's keeping it on the down low and that you don't realize it as prominently. This might also be a change in audience though, right? A change in expectations when going into an anime. I do feel like a lot of the older anime back in those days, early 2000s and whatever, or before that, they had to express emotions a lot more vehemently because it felt like the audience had to actually get, sometimes you had to put it on the nose in order for everyone to kind of get it. And these days, I feel like animators and narrators and storyboarders are often like, you know what? If they don't get it, that's fine, right? Most people will get it. And they are a little bit more subtle with that. Another one last difference I did notice between the two of them was that the voice actors sound a lot less. Let me put it the other way around. The voice actors sound a lot younger in the original, in the 2009 anime. Especially Lawrence and Nora, but also to a minor degree Holo. All of them sound a lot younger than they do today, which makes perfect sense, right? 2009 to 2024, that's a decent amount of time, right? And your voice would obviously, even if you were at that point already in your 20s, your voice would still mature. And your voice acting would mature. So, yeah. And obviously no future Holo scene. That was not in there as well. All right, we'll make a quick cut, and then we're gonna go into some of the excerpts. I'm gonna read something. I think I'm gonna read those first on like the 7 episode or volume 7 side colors, and then at the end of it, I'm actually gonna read the afterword in volume 2 of Isuna Hasekura. Quick fade and we'll be back. All right, we're back. And this first one, I do not have a lot of stuff that I can actually put up. None of these I have a lot that I can or want to put up front. So there's not going to be much of a slideshow this time. I might be blending in some of the beautiful oil painting style backgrounds that we had in the flashbacks. Other than that, we will be mostly alone. I do not know how long I'm gonna actually read that because this is like a pretty hearty excerpt. I would say we're gonna start in the beginning. The boy and the girl and a white flower. Right here, you see how it looks. I don't know if it's in frame completely. Yeah, it is. I can put it like this, right? Nice. We're gonna read a little bit something, and then we're gonna jump, and then we're gonna read a little bit something more. All right. Class sat upon a flat rock by the road, just past the little hill. Without anything to obstruct the view, he could see quite a ways in every direction, despite the hill not being particularly large. Things looked the same in every direction, and although he had heard that the road continued all the way to the sea, he couldn't see so much as a river. Class, just 10 years and a bit more in the world, could not begin to conceive of what exactly the sea was. But what he had heard, it was not something that one could easily overlook while walking down the road. So it had to be a ways off still. He set the fat stick he was using as a walking staff down beside him and picked up a leather water skin. He wetted his lips with just a bit of the bitter leather-flavored water. The breeze ruffled his brown hair and he looked casually back over his shoulder. The house that had kicked them out was long since out of sight. Class felt more vindicated than lonely at the fact. He didn't know exactly why he felt that way, but in any case, the goal had entered his field of vision. He wondered if she'd stopped because of the white flowers that were in bloom there, and indeed it was so. Winter was over, its dry, freezing winds were at an end, and in the spring sunshine the scent of soft grass filled the air. Squatting down, gazing tirelessly, almost hungrily at the nameless flowers, she looked not unlike a sheep. Her head was completely covered by a hood, and the hem of her wide robe nearly touched the ground. It was close enough to see the places where the robe was slightly dirty, but from a bit farther off she would definitely resemble a sheep. Her name was Ares. She said she didn't know how old she was, but to Class' frustration, she was just a bit taller than him. Thus he decided that she was 2 years older than he was. Ares, Class called her name, and Ares finally looked up. You promised we'd make it over 4 hills by midday. Although he still didn't know what Ares was thinking generally, Class had grasped a few key truths. One was that she would never do something just because he asked her to, but if he got her to make a promise, she would always keep it. Class wondered how many times he'd thought about leaving her behind after she'd stopped midway before he realized that fact. Ares sluggishly stood and dragged herself up the hill, looking back several times at the flowers as she went. Class sighed at her and spoke. Are they that rare? He was still sitting at the flagged rock and so looked up at her. With her hood over her head, her face was not visible unless one was very close to looking up at her from below. So it was that Class had traveled with her for some time before realizing that while her expression changed little, the face beneath the hood was very lovely. Those are flowers, right? Asked Ares, as though trying to confirm something very important. Yep, they're flowers. You saw them yesterday and the day before, didn't you? Her cool blue eyes were cast down at the flowers that grew at the base of the hill. Another breeze came up, causing a lock of blonde hair that strayed out from under the hood to tremble. But it's really odd, said Ares. What is? Ares looked at Class for the first time, cocking her head questioningly. There were no vases beneath those flowers. Why weren't they wilted? Without so much as a furrowed brow, Class looked down from Ares' face to the rest of her. We don't have much water, so don't get dirty. Didn't I tell you? Ares' hand was hidden by her sleeve. When Class took it, he found that her fingers were dirtied with soil. It had even gotten underneath her fingernails, her clean hands now gone to waste. Class was about to wipe them off with a glove from his waist, but Ares suddenly snatched her hand back and looked at him with suspicious eyes. I was told that filth comes only from the heart, she said. It is not good to lie. Class tried to figure out something to say, but finally gave up. You're right, sorry. The corners of Ares' eyes crinkled as she gave a small smile, and she nodded, satisfied. Alright. I'm gonna go a little bit more ahead. Basically, Ares' and Class' backstory, they both were supposedly in a manor of some lord or another, and she was kind of part of a house, or was in the part of the house that was supposedly built on bidding of some other faction or whatever. And he never saw her, she was just beneath the wall. And he was a servant, probably in the fields, working for the Lord. And the Lord supposedly died. The brother came in and threw them all out. So basically now they're homeless, and he saw her as one of the only ones, because a lot of them just cried and wailed, and other servants just didn't believe and continued working or whatnot. So she was one of the only ones who just walked away. And he just walked after her and caught up with her, and since then they traveled together. Compared to being yelled at and beaten while hauling water pails all over the mansion, Class found traveling with Ares to be relaxing and enjoyable. But there was one part of it that he found deeply nerve-wracking, and that was nighttime. The night is nothing to fear. Just as the day has the sun and the night has the moon, God is always watching over us. Yeah, he answered in a hoarse voice, though in some strange part of his head he felt that the only thing watching over them were the moon and the many stars in the sky. They lay atop the last hill they'd reached that day. Although he knew there was nothing and no one around, he was still bashful. This is what God said. A person alone fears loneliness and hunger and trembles in the cold, but with two, loneliness is healed and cold's edge softened. Yeah. Are you still cold? Class very nearly answered, but only shook his head. However, Ares did not seem to believe him. Her arms already encircled him, and she pulled him in with more strength, embracing him. It is good to endure hunger, but God never wished for us to be cold. Though he'd now heard these words 4 times, Klaus's body still trembled with nervousness. At first, he'd been unable to sleep because of it, and it was all the worse now that he'd noticed just how lovely Ares really was. Removing her large outer robe, using it to place a blanket, Ares embraced Class tightly. Though it was spring, the nights were yet cold. While the travel was not a great burden for Class, different only from his previous experience in that he was now sleeping outside most nights, Ares seemed to consider the camping a trial and sent by God, and did what she could to lessen it by using her body's warmth. On the second night he slept soundly, thanks to his exhaustion from not sleeping the previous night. On the third night he somehow found his way past his nerves to sleep. By the fourth night, although he'd begun to get used to the routine, he noticed how sweet Ares' body smelled. And as he breathed it in, his face reddened. It was sweet, but not sweet like the smell of honey over fresh baked bread. The situation inspired feelings of guilt in Class. There was something he wasn't telling Ares. He heard her sneeze. Here she was worrying only about other people, but Class was sure she was cold herself too. She stirred slightly. God may be angry at me for saying this, she started to say. Class couldn't see her face, but he could nonetheless tell she was smiling. But I don't think I could have done this alone. I'm so glad you're a girl, Class. Class had never once in his life been mistaken for a girl, and if 100 people were asked, surely all 100 of them would laugh at the idea's impossibility. But he was quite sure that Ares sincerely believed he was a girl. After all, the single time they'd passed the horse-drawn cart, Ares had turned pale and said, "Is that the animal they call man?" I've gotten quite sleepy. Good night. Ares was quite deft at such things, and once she said she was sleepy, she would soon be asleep. Class deliberately did not reply and stayed silent. Once he heard the rabbit-like sound of her sleeping breaths, he very gently nestled his head into her bosom, praying nobody was looking at them. When he said good night, as though it was an excuse, it really was just an excuse. That night, though, he suddenly awoke. He glanced up at the sky and saw the silver of a moon had almost crossed the entire sky. It was the deepest part of the night. The cold was considerable, and pushing away his shame, he put his arms around Ares' body. He stirred for a moment, but finally found a comfortable position and took another breath. It was very still all around, and the only sound was that of Ares' breathing. Back when he'd slept in the mansion's barn, there was never a single moment of quiet. Rats were constantly scurrying around in search of overlooked scraps of livestock feed, and they'd come crawling into his clothes whenever they liked. The eyes of the snakes and owls that fed on the rats gleamed in the darkness, and those were hardly the only night visitors. There were foxes after the chickens and wolves after the sheep. When they sensed danger, the horses would stir and struggle, and the clucking and crowing of the chickens would reach a crescendo as they ran about. The nights he spent with Ares were so quiet his ears rang with silence. And when the sun rose and morning came, there was no one to work him like a dog and none of the endless chores. Falling asleep had never before been such a pleasure. While he'd been surprised to be thrown out the mansion, he didn't understand why the other servants had been so stricken by it that they'd wept. They didn't have to do chores anymore. It was sure that they didn't have much more food left, but he was sure they'd reach the sea before they ran out of food. The sea was apparently full of fish, so all they had to do was catch some and eat them. And if they could do that, why not just live there? He wasn't sure if Ares had ever seen fish. Surely not. He'd have to explain to her then, explain that they were animals that could swim underwater without drowning. He let slip the soft laugh at the thought of it. It was very quiet. Class then tried to chase such things from his head and go back to sleep, whereupon he heard the faintest hint of a sound. Thup, 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 went the quiet sound. It might have been Ares' heartbeat. Class thought it mysterious that he could hear it so clearly despite the swell of her chest, but then he realized something strange. He could hear the sound from his other ear, his right ear, which was pressed to the ground. Thup, 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 went the sound. What could it be, he murmured to himself. Immediately, he reached back to grasp a stick he was using as walking staff. Wolf, he was about to shout, but he swallowed the word, raising his head and looked around. Ba-dum, roared the pulse in his ears. It was the sound of his own heart. The beating of his heart seemed to force breath audibly from his mouth. He swallowed hard and looked at the right, then the left. The moon was in the sky and visibility was good, but he could see no sign of a wolf. Ares! His palms were sweaty and his throat was dry. He shook Ares' shoulder and looked around but could see nothing. Whatever it was out there seemed to have noticed the change in Class. He felt the change in the mood. Anyone that slept in a barn knew, whether they wanted to know or not, that wolves were special, those golden eyes shining in the dark of night. Though Ares had finally awoken, her focus had yet to fall on him, and she was so seemingly helpless it made him want to fool her. Class pulled his staff close and looked out again over the land. Wolves rarely attacked humans, or so Class believed. 3 times before they'd jump over his head with a chicken in their jaws, but he couldn't help wondering if that was because there had been chickens to eat. There it was again, the sound. Thup, 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 seemingly louder than it was before. He was sure of it. They were watching him, sharpening their fangs. What should I do? He asked himself silently, over and over. He wasn't considering taking Ares and trying to run away, mostly because the moment he moved, he was sure they would attack. What should I do? Ares finally seemed to come completely awake and looked at Class uncertainly. It chilled him like cold water over his head, and he tried to put his finger to his lips. What's wrong? Asked Ares, sitting up just as they heard an indescribably beautiful howl. Ares looked frantically around, utterly bewildered. In his gut, Class felt that he wanted to cry, wanted to rage, but managed somehow to endure the stepping feeling and jumped to his feet, looking ahead, and then he saw it. He saw in a moment that the many shadows that fluttered atop the moonlit hills melted into the dark of night at the reverberation of the howl. An instant later, his eyes met the golden irises of another's. Hurry, we have to go. Trembling, his hand shook as he grabbed the burlap sack and took the hand of a bewildered Ares. And even then he was frozen, unable to stand. The wolves had stopped trying to hide their footfalls, which now sounded like a gust of wind blowing through the forest. He was too scared to stop his teeth from chattering, but he mustered up enough courage to hold his staff at the ready. He pushed Ares behind him, terrified but brandishing his staff like a spear. The wolves dove off into a pool of darkness as they descended the hill. And then they charged back out of the depths. Transfixed by the golden irises, he felt with strange clarity the sensation of his own mouth splitting in a wolf-like smile. Fear was forcing him to bare his teeth. But the wolves, of course, were not flinching from their charge. Huh? Suddenly, the lead wolf jumped sideways. It was so jarring for a moment, Class wondered if someone had shot an arrow at it. The wolves passed Class and Ares, hitting the ground and wheeling back around. They were so close that he could see every one of their hairs on their raised hackles. But their gaze was not on Class and Ares, their intended prey. It was on something farther off, and they crouched low. Fangs bared, they growled, their forepaws poised to jump. They should have pounced at any time, but they seemed less like they were hunting prey and more like they were turning to face an enemy. Had they been shaken by Class's courage? Unrelated to such thoughts, the wolves were watching a single point, and then an instant later they jumped and scattered. It took a moment for Class to realize that they had all run away. They had fled farther and faster than they'd arrived. The overwhelming sense of danger was entirely gone, without leaving so much as the feeling of having been saved. Class, stunned, watched the wolves retreat, and for a moment he didn't think about anything at all. The only reason he looked back at Ares was that she touched his back. What happened? She was trembling slightly. There were wolves. That was a close one, he said, hands still tied around his staff. He had no intention of teasing Ares for his shaking, but still hadn't realized he was shaking himself. Ares cocked her head slightly. Wolves? She sneezed charmingly. Ares didn't know what a wolf was. That meant her shivering had to be out of nothing more than the chill. Class looked at the staff he'd brandished as a spear, his lip curling. Disappointed, he dropped it. Wolves. They were about to attack us just now, weren't they? They attack people and they attack livestock. Oh my, are they men? Class wondered if she was making fun of him, but then he remembered the words of the mentioned stable master who'd been old enough to be his father. Yeah, men are wolves. At those words, finally, Ares' face evidenced some fear, and she drew a quick breath, looking around. It's all right. They're all gone of some... But he didn't finish his sentence. Since in the space of a moment his face had been pressed into Ares' soft chest and he couldn't so much as breathe. Do not worry, God will protect us. There's nothing to fear, she said, hugging him tightly. Class was now more scared of her than the wolves. What if right here he was to tell the truth, that he was a boy? What would she do? Even Class knew that it was wrong to lie and to deceive people. But when he moved his head slightly and caught his breath, Ares' scent filled his nostrils. The scent was more than enough to erase the memory of terror about the attack, though their lives had only just been saved. He decided to stay quiet on the matter for a bit longer. Still, I wonder what scared them off. Yeah, this was a pretty long excerpt, right? I'm sorry. I hope you enjoyed it. There is a little bit something just a bit further ahead than this. We are still following Ares and Class, and to give you an idea about their appearances, we do have a funny little picture right here of the moment when they get to sleep. Yeah, a little bit ahead, and that shows us why this is in this novel at all, because obviously so far we've only been following Lawrence and Holo and all that, so we're like maybe wondering why this is even a part of the novel itself. Just a bit of water, the unseen next town, the sea at the end of the road, whether it was there or not, and the unimaginably wide world. Such words floated up in his mind, stirring up his irritation. Up until the previous day, the trouble had been relaxed, but today all he could feel was that they were moving too slowly. It made him want to click his tongue in frustration, and he didn't bother hiding it. As usual, she didn't move. He was so angry that he didn't want to bother raising his voice, and for a moment even considered leaving her there. It was just one road, so even she shouldn't get lost. Just as he was thinking about how nice that would be, there was a strange sound. He looked at Ares, who had one hand on the ground, and then... Ares! She moved, and just as Class thought she might get up, she vomited onto the ground. It was so unexpected that he couldn't move. Ares didn't so much as look up before collapsing onto her side. Class tossed his back aside and ran to her. Ares! Ares! He was more stunned than worried. Rushing to her side and picking her up in his arms, he pulled her hood back and called her name. Ares slumped unmoving, and past her open mouth, he saw her slack tongue and couldn't help but think of a dying sheep. Ares! It wasn't concern that replaced his surprise, it was terror. Ares was going to die. Wanting to cry, he shook her shoulders, he slapped her face, but there was no reaction. A wave of fear rose up within him. Now Class was the one who felt nauseated. Immediately thereafter, Ares vomited again. Thank goodness, Class thought. She's not dead. His relief lasted but a moment, though, as with nothing more to expel, she curled into a ball and moaned in pain. Class rubbed the tears from his eyes, took a handkerchief from his side, and wiped Ares' mouth with it. After that, he didn't know what else to do. The words healing herbs occurred to him, but he seriously doubted the grass that surrounded them would have any effect at all. Ares' pained breath was getting quieter and quieter. It made him imagine her life as a flickering flame, and the thought brought tears anew. He wondered if she hadn't been tired but ill. If he'd known, he would have taken more breaks from walking. Excuses and regrets swirled around in his heart, but no word save Ares' name came from his mouth. And yet he didn't call her name, shaking her slack shoulders. What should I do? He could not bring himself to say what he was thinking. Somebody help me. No one would help him in a place like this, and if somebody did come, it would probably be the useless god that Ares was praying to. Yet, in the bottom of his heart, he wished deeply for someone, even that bogus deity, to come and save them. Oh God! And when he heard it, he thought it was the voice of God. Whatever happened here? He looked up, totally shocked to hear another voice, but he couldn't make out its source through his teary eyes. He rubbed them and looked again. There was no one there. What? Tears began to swell up again. What happened here, boy? Behind him. Class looked back, and indeed someone was standing there, backlit by the sun. Ill, is she? The clear voice didn't seem to match its tone. Since the figure was backlit and Class was still sitting, he couldn't ascertain its height or face. But, pathetically, the simple fact that someone other than himself was now present caused tears to overflow anew. I don't know, she just fell over and… the shadowy figure murmured, lightly whirling around to regard Class from in front of him. It was a woman. She peered at Ares' profile. This looks like… Class unconsciously straightened. The woman continued. "'Tis simple exhaustion," she proclaimed anticlimactically. Huh? "Look at how hard your legs are," said the woman, reaching out to put her hand on the prone Ares' calf. But she asked many times for a rest, did she not? Added the woman flatly. And worse, she hadn't been eating properly. 'Tis no surprise she fell. Now that it had been said, it seemed like the most obvious thing in the world, but as soon as he realized it, something strange occurred to him. How did you know that? Curses, slip of the tongue. She deliberately put her hand to her mouth and looked the other way. There was no mistaking it. She must have been watching them from somewhere. But Class had gotten a good view of their surroundings every time they'd crested the hill. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, so where had she been watching from? In truth, I planned not to say anything to you, but this was simply too pathetic. The woman patted Ares' side and shot Class an accusing look. A hot feeling stabbed through his chest. No, I always try to think about her? You knew perfectly well that her body and yours are different. He flinched at the words. It wasn't just that he was at a loss for something to say. He was stunned. I've been watching you since last night. You know well truly that she and you are not alike, she said, her expression shifting into a sticky smile. Class could feel his face becoming hotter and hotter. He'd been watched. I suppose that's what they mean when they say, the luck to be born a man. Still, the woman stood with her hands on her hips, lips curling into a fang-bearing smile. You had the pluck to stand your ground before the wolves. That much is praiseworthy. Wah! Not a very discerning lad, are you? Sneered the woman past her fangs, looking down at the boy. No, it wasn't just that. He just, that moment, realized something. It had been so strange that he simply hadn't seen it until that moment. The woman that stood before him wore a cloak around her shoulders and a sash tied around her waist. With fine fur-lined trousers, her hair was chestnut brown, but atop her head there was something strange. If you're just noticing these, you must not have noticed this. Her cloak swished dramatically. Ah! 'Tis fine fur, indeed, no? The puff of fur swished audibly. The grandly furred wolf's tail swayed, and the beast's ear atop her head flicked. In that moment, the memory of the wolf's action the previous night flashed through his head. Could it be? Could it be? The woman's gaze pierced him, as though testing him. Last night, the one who saved us, there was… A breath of wind caused both the hem of the woman's cloak and the tip of her tail to flutter. The light of the setting sun fell across her profile. Indeed, she said, as Class was at a loss for words. It was you! You chased the wolves away! I merely happened to be sleeping nearby. They realized I was there and turned tail on their own accord. The woman sounded almost bored. Class swallowed after closing his gaping mouth. He'd heard many times of beings that looked human but were not, who occasionally descended to grant good fortune or to play tricks on mortals. Class spoke in a tremulous whisper. Could you be a spirit? Hardly, said the woman with sudden irritation, tossing her head. But the mysterious part beast person before him soon made an awkward face. Well, 'tis true that some of your kind do call me such things, but I like it not. Her expression of embarrassment at having shouted made her seem not so very much older than Class, and her face was unmistakably beautiful. How shall I refer to you? Asked Class, using the words he'd heard adults use in such situations, but the woman's brows only knitted in further irritation. I do not like that either, and untangling your stumbling tongue is a nuisance. Class's face felt hot, the teasing being directed at him, but thinking the girl was some kind of spirit, he looked down, whereupon the spirit sighed and brought her face nearer to the ground. Come, look up. I only thought to aid you in your difficult travels. I did not reveal myself to you to endure your worship. He was too scared to look up, and yet still timidly he brought his gaze up to meet hers. You're still at the age where such an expression suits you. The smile that greeted him when he looked up made him realize that there was many different kinds of smiles in the world. The instant he saw it, he looked down again, his face even redder than before, but for a very different reason. This time the spirit did not become angry. My name is Hollow, said the spirit briefly as she squatted down. We could go on, right? It's an interesting thing in general. I'm sorry, by the way, that the camera changed. Was mainly because my my main camera, I still only have a memory card that is like 64 gigs or something, and this is gonna fill up soon. So for this little excerpt, for this little portion, I just put on the camera. I'm probably putting some screenshots over that anyway of the episode itself, so it should be fine. Just casually more editing work for me. Fuck me, I guess. That being said, I do hope you appreciated that little one. I don't even know if I should read the other one. I suppose we can do that. No reason not to. This is actually an excerpt from when Holo got sick, right? The little thing in between. I don't think we need to actually go through everything, but this is like a little excerpt of thoughts going through her head, like as she is reflecting on things past. She was different from her surroundings. Even if she assumed human form, they would always know she was different, grotesque. She was relied on for her strength, feared for her size, prized for her usefulness. She and her kind thought it natural to serve in this capacity, and so they did. They were all of one mind that there was merit for them in doing so. But the worshippers required majesty of their gods, in addition to favor. If the objects of the worship were meager, after all, how could they expect the gods to be able to bestow blessings? Though she had never asked to be worshipped, she was unable to abandon these worshippers and was thus trapped. Without anyone to worship, they would fade with the seasons, lost to fear, madness, cruelty. She knew it was foolish, but no matter how she suffered, she couldn't abandon them. She'd never asked for this and never been asked, and yet centuries passed. Something smelled delicious. She was accustomed to smelling tasty foods. But while her nose twitched at such things, she knew she would never be shown a welcoming smile, not even from someone cheeky who didn't know his place. Can you sit up? Her body had been gradually recovering, and now she had little difficulty in crawling out from under the blankets. Nonetheless, she shook her head, her eyes still heavy with drowsiness. The prison was long in the past. She'd been able to make her long-held dream into reality, to dance and play like a cub. To be selfish, to be powerless, and to be protected by someone. Honestly, if I ever fall ill, I expect you to return the favor. Having just woken up and being still mostly exhausted, she must have looked like a cat dragged from its favorite sleeping spot. It was embarrassing, but having done it once, she couldn't stop. Aye, so long as you don't mind treatment in the style of the wolves of Yoitsu. She grinned to hide her self-reproach. In any case, her companion's face twitched, but she was quite sure that if he asked about that treatment, he would be very happy with the answer. It involved a lot of licking and snuggling. However, she was not so kind as to tell him without being asked. Ah, 'tis well, my nose is very keen. I'll know long before you turn this poorly and do something about it. After saying this, she thought about adding something about not chatting happily away with some other female while not noticing him until he collapsed, but decided against it. Happily, yes, he had looked very happy, but her companion knew what his job was. And in that moment, chatting nicely with the girl had been his job. So he said, and she believed him. Still, I'm sorry I didn't notice, but I wish you'd said something. In any case, yes, I'm rather thick, said her companion, shrugging. You surely are. I might have a much more serious sickness, and you'd doubtlessly still fail to notice. Huh? He looked at her questioningly, but she would not explain. He was too thick to make the connections. She was lovesick, but she knew it would be a long time before he noticed it. 'Tis nothing, never mind. Now food, she said, with her companion childishly frowned at. Humans judge things based on their appearances. Being bested by someone who appeared to be a young, hungry girl was frustrating. It was a complicated emotion, but not uncomfortable. Even in the book of scriptures that circulated around the world, there was a satirical story of God dressing in rags and walking the roads, thereby losing all sense of formality and ceremony. You're quite the princess this morning, he grumbled, but nonetheless he removed the lid from the pot of porridge and picked up a dish. No knight would ever speak so rudely to a princess. She grinned. Would you kindly spoon-feed me? She asked by the way of presuming on him. Her companion froze, stricken, a face too pathetic by far to ever be suitable for a knight. Yeah, so we do have the confirmation here in the book. Love sickness, at least her interpretation of that. And ours probably too. Let's be honest. Either way, very nice excerpt. Right. Last excerpt, Afterword of Volume 2 of Spice and Wolf, which is the arcs that we have been in so far, until the very end of like episode 12 was the last episode that was describing this arc in this volume. Afterword by Isuna Hasekura. It's been a while. This is Isuna Hasekura. Well, here's volume 2. I know, I'm shocked too. But if you wish to know what is most shocking of all, it's that when I started to write the second volume, I utterly forgot the personalities of the two main characters. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's true, even though I myself can barely believe it. You always hear about bird-brained people who forget everything after taking 3 steps, and that definitely fits a chicken who reads a horror story on the net and gets so freaked out he can't even go to the bathroom, right? Now that I think about it, there's one more surprising thing. What is it, you ask? Well, I bought stock. Having won a prize for writing a novel with a merchant as the protagonist, I put half the prize money into a certain stock. I wrote about it in the afternoon for volume 1, 2, and I get this evil grin on my face when I think about multiplying my money in the stock market. This time my delusions have just gotten wilder, but perhaps as a consequence of some shadowy group strap, the stock dropped steadily for 2 weeks. It even fell on a day when 90% of stocks on the market rose. Right behind the window I'm writing this afterward. There's a stock tool that tells me every minute change in the price, and today it seems to be trading in a very narrow range. Although it is dropping, it seems that it's not going well, just like the novel. How odd. I'm a sad piece of work, but I hope you enjoyed this book. Once again, you, Ayakura, provided wonderful illustrations. Thank you, by the way. They fit the images in my head perfectly. Thank you so much. Also to my editor, I am so sorry for all the mistakes in my Japanese. Next time, I promise I'll try to write the novel so we can finish in a single meeting. And of course, to all of those who hold this book in your hands, my heartfelt thanks. I hope to see you again in volume 3. Very cool. Stock market shenanigans. Good times, good times. I know that. I mean, I'm not that invested, but I've done some ETFs because that is actually a clever way to do it these days. Just hopefully get some retirement money for later, since studying doesn't really grant you a lot of retirement money. Yeah, that was Spice and Wolf, episode 13, the review. I do hope you enjoyed that. I'm sorry that I have to downgrade us to 180p at the end of this, but I do think barely anybody of you will be bothered by it, since my microphone is still top quality. And this is mainly also just a listening experience. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I see you next time. And I hope I also see you with the reaction to episode 14 of Spice and Wolf, which I don't know when we're going to do that, but probably soon at some point. Maybe I'll do 14 and 15 together. We'll have to see, right? I'll have to see if I have time for that. Maybe I'll also just wait for it until my exams are over at the end of July, and then I'm like, hey, I reacted to 4 or 5 episodes at one after another. That's also a possibility. We'll have to see. But I'll see you next time.